All right, so keep an eye on that thing up on the top there, every once in a while, look at it, make sure, otherwise.
Okay.
So, thank you for including me.
Yes, of course. Thank you for being here with
Yeah.
me. And I'm going to ask you some questions.
Sure.
Okay, so let's see. So tell me more about your early life and, well, I don't know if you want me to include, okay, I don't know, I should ask about this before recording. I wrote like a,
Do me a favor,
yeah.
introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. My name is Crystal Margonis.
What are you doing here today?
I'm interviewing Mr. Jim McCauley here today. And I'm going to ask some questions about you and what you're doing for us.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, so tell me
And
more.
you're a journalism major, right? You want to go into media? You want to be a
I want to do public relations.
public relations?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm a little bit nervous when it comes to like this kind of stuff, so
Sure.
I'm getting my experience.
It took me a very long time to get used to doing in front of the camera, doing videos.
Mm-hmm.
You said you went out and looked on my YouTube account, see all those videos.
Mm-hmm.
There are hundreds of videos that were done, putting these things together because I'm standing there and I'm holding this camera and I'm doing this kind of conversation.
Right.
And it's something. It's not an easy thing to do. So in any case, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for asking.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I don't know if you want me to read a little summary about you that I wrote.
However you want to proceed.
Okay,
This is your interview.
alrighty. So this is Jim McCauley, is a former accountant who spent the first 10 years of his career working for two high-tech companies in Silicon Valley.
Yes.
He took his previous experience in accounting for those high-tech companies and started his own consulting practice, which offered a variety of services, which included providing executive services and finance, accounting, sales, and operations and administration. Macaulay gradually made his way up to the corporate ladder. Macaulay understands the significance of working hard to get what you want. His proposed tax reform plan is aimed at young voters, which make much of the working class. Some of the questions I'm going to ask him today is going to be number one. Can you tell me more about your early life and what influenced your career choice?
Early life. How far you want to go back? You want me when I was a kid?
Maybe like when you started, like I guess thinking about school and like where you wanted to go in life. So.
Well, I was always going to be an accountant.
Okay.
I was always. There was no question about it. I was going to be an accountant. My grandfather. I used to spend a lot of time with he and my grandmother. He was an accountant. Had been an accountant for I don't know how many years. And then my father was a CPA, and my uncle was a CPA, and my other uncle was a CPA. So they were all accountants. So when my grandparents were asking me 7, 8, 9 years old, what are you going to do? I'm going to be an accountant. And then I got to be in high school and growing up and decided I don't really want to be an accountant. I want to fix the country. I want to fix the world. This is the 1970s and kids were active and they wanted to go out and they wanted to do things to make the world a better place to live in, right?
Right.
So I wanted to do that, and I started my in college, junior college, graduated from South San Francisco High School in 1971, and then I went straight to junior college, and I took a couple of economics classes, and I had a teacher there. Her name was Shirley Kress, professor, and we were working on a project, and I turned it in, and it dealt with inflation, and I had sat down and done some thinking about how inflation worked, because inflation was a big deal in the 1970s. And I was looking at the different ways that it might occur, and I came up with this theory on how to put it together. So I wrote it up and I handed it in, and she looked at me in class one day and she said, I want to see you after class. Why don't you come up and talk to me? So I said, okay. So I went up and we sat down and talked. She said, where did you get this idea? And I said, I was just thinking about it, how things kind of come together. She said, there's a guy by the name of Patinkin, and this is his theory. This is actually what he came up with in terms of trying to understand how inflation works. She says, have you ever thought about being an economist? And I thought, well, that's interesting. So that's how I got into economics.
Okay.
And that was my first love. So I've studied economics. I went to San Jose State from Skyline Junior College and was studying economics at the time. It was said at San Jose State University you could spend 4 years going to school there and never learn anything but Karl Marx, socialism, and the dialectic and all the things that are associated with communism and the like. My dad was concerned about it. My mother called me and says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm studying economics." She says, "Do you know that all this is going on?" And I said, don't need to worry about it. The chancellor of the university disenfranchised the department, fired half of the teachers. So I've got this half of teachers who are pure capitalists, and I have half of my teachers who are pure socialists. So every day I get to go through this argument. There was a very renowned professor, one of the leaders in the Communist Party, if you will, in America, and his class was probably the best attended class of all. I was about ready to graduate. It was almost done. And I took his class in Marxian political economy. His name was Doug Dowd. And Doug and I would have all kinds of conversations about this thing, and I would argue back and forth with him. And one day he looked at me and goes, "Jim, you're a good guy." And I'm like, and there's a big class. I'm standing room only. He goes, "You're a good guy. But comes the revolution, I don't think I want to be standing next to the barricades with you." And I laughed at that, and everybody chuckled. And I walked out of the class and I got to thinking about it. I said, what am I doing? I'm about ready to graduate in economics. I don't know anything, right? I'm going to have to go on and get a master's degree. I'm going to have to get a PhD. I've been in school a long time. I'd like to be done. I'd like to go on, Had a girl. I was thinking about maybe getting married, all the things that you did start to do. And so I decided, no, that's not the right thing. So I walked into the business school and I signed up for the area of finance. Started studying, taking all those classes. Took me another year. Graduated top of my class. Did real well because the economics was a really good foundation for studying finance. Because the economics talks about the macro, kind of looking at things on a general basis from a global perspective. And then the finance piece is argument takes all that macro stuff and it turns it into the processes and the procedures and the ways that you look at the things directionally. So I had never really took too much accounting. I pushed it off to the side because I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do, and it required too much discipline, to be honest with you. You got to be really on top of it. So I pushed the accounting aside, and when I graduated, I went off to work at National Semiconductor, which was a high-tech semiconductor company at the time. They don't exist anymore. But they were a huge company. And at the time, inflation, like I said, was a big issue. So the Financial Accounting Standards Board had come out and said, we want companies to go through a replacement cost analysis. We want to know what it would cost to replace that business if you had to start from scratch. And we want a footnote in the financial statements that talks about it. So I got invited to go participate in cleaning up this project that they've been working on for a while. And I walked in and I looked at it and went through it, did the analysis, working with the other guy. And I walked up to the guy who was in charge of the program. I said, "Richard, I know you got this thing just about done, but this is wrong. Way down in here, you made an assumption which isn't correct." And we talked about it, and he goes, "Shoot." So we went in and we sat down with the controller of National Semiconductor, and Richard explained to the controller, who'd been working on this thing for like 4 months, he said, "Our analysis is incomplete and it's wrong. The numbers are off." And he says, "How come?" Well, Jim showed me, and he's correct. So the controller looked at me and said, "Well, it's interesting. It's not material. It's not an issue. It's just a footnote in the balance sheet. We won't worry about it." So off it went, and he and Richard went off and made the presentation. I didn't get invited. Shouldn't have been any surprise, right? So anyway, what I realized, though, working in National Semiconductor, is while I understood a pretty good idea about the way the environment worked, and I had a pretty good idea how to apply that in terms of finance, I couldn't speak the language. Because you know what the language is? Bookkeeping.
Oh.
You got to be able to do accounting. You got to be able to talk debits and credits. You got to be able to talk about expense statements. You got to know how that all comes together and how it all works. So I decided to heck with it. I'll go back to school, and I spent another year taking all the accounting. So when I finally ended up finishing up at San Jose State, got married, had degrees in finance and economics, and minored in accounting, and went to work for a little company. So that's kind of my move to college, What else would you like to know?
Okay, let's see. So I'll just go to my second question, and
Okay.
then let's see. Was there a specific, and I don't know if you already answered this, but was there a specific event or turning point that led you to where you are today?
Oh, life's full of choices.
Mm-hmm.
Life's full of choices. When I guess probably, excuse me, 1995, after you had mentioned I had that consulting practice. So part of what I was doing, and the reason I got into the consulting thing was, I turned around, I looked at my son, who this is 1989, so by then he's 89 years old, and I realized I hadn't spent any time with him. I spent most of my time working, right? I went in, when my wife and I got married, it was decided that when we had children, she would take care of the kids and I would go to work. So when she told me she was pregnant, which was a little earlier than I thought, I said, that's okay. And at that point, I had to grow up, I had to kick it into gear. And so I went to work for a little company out of college, no more than about 60 people. We made pen plotters. Pen plotter is a graphic output device. It's pre-printers. And the way it worked was, you sent a computer program that provided all the information to this mechanical device, which had this pen block that went along the x-axis like this, right? And it had either 1, 2, 4 pens in it. And then as it went back and forth, it would lay down the ink based on the way the pens were being told to move. So it lay down the ink. And then the y-axis was this paper, which was rolling on these sprockets, and it would go up and down, up and down. So then it would draw these things. So you could draw just about anything as long as you had the information from the program to drive the device. So it was a really cool little product. There was only about 60 people in the company, and I went to work for the guy because his name was Joe, last name Royer, good guy, became a very good friend. He promised me when he interviewed me that if I came to work for him, he'd teach me how businesses worked from an accounting and financial perspective. And he knew I was looking at some other really good opportunities, but he made that personal commitment to me. He was good to his word, and I worked for him for almost four or 5 years. And during that period of time, he taught me a whole lot about the way things actually happen in business. I started out on an accounts payable desk, and I was looking to be a controller, and the 5 men that ran the business, right, the marketing guy, and the sales guy, and the engineering guy, and the manufacturing guy, they were 20 years my senior, and as far as they were concerned, I didn't know nothing. And so they made sure I, kind of came along and paid my dues before I got to have any control. But within about 2 years, I had absolute control over the books, and then I had control over them, which means I basically they didn't necessarily like it, but at some point when you've got all the information and you're driving the budgets and you're holding them accountable for their expenses and what they're doing every month, whether they're making their numbers or not, because you're a controller, you get to go and you get to beat them up.
Sounds like a good deal.
So that was one choice or one event. I decided to go into consulting because like I said, I'd spent almost 10 years working in 2 different companies at that point. Hadn't really spent any time with my 2 sons, and and my daughter had just been born, or was about to be born. So I wanted to spend time with them, so I started this little company called J.R.&J. McCauley. And J stands for Jim, and R stands for Robert, and J stands for Jacqueline, and that's what I did. And I worked with a number of different clients, but mostly it wasn't about the consulting. It was mostly about having the time to be involved with what they were doing. So I became the soccer coach and the baseball coach, and I went on field trips, and I spent a lot of time, 5, 6 years doing that. But I also loved the market, so I started trading the market. And then 1994, I made an investment in Intel, buying some options. And I took $10,000 in November, and by the time I got to July, I'd made $1.25 million. And that changed. That changed me, right?
That's good.
Yeah. We paid off the house. We ended up moving out. That's how we got up here. We came out of the Silicon Valley where he had been doing. And I thought, well, I'll just trade the market, and that's what I'll do. Turned out to be harder than I thought it would be. I've I mean, so, do you know anything about the market? You trade the market?
A little bit, yeah.
Do you know
Yeah.
anything about stock options?
Yeah, like you have to, what is basically like you're betting against what you think that the number is gonna be once the market is over, right? Or something like that.
So an option is a right to do something, right?
Right.
Okay, so you have a right to buy something, that's called a call.
Mhm.
You have a right to sell something, that's called a put. Then you have, depending upon what the relationship of the call or put is to what's called the strike price, which is the current market price of whatever it is you're buying against. That defines whether it's in the money or at the money or out of the money.
Mhm.
So if your stock is trading for, let's say $100, and let's say you buy the right to own it at 105 next week, okay? Then you're gonna pay a premium for that right, okay? So they're gonna charge you a fee to have that right, to own the stock at 105 in a week. If the stock goes up from 100 to 105, right, then you're break even.
Mhm.
If the stock goes to 115 during that 1 week or 2 week period before the option expires, then
Attention all writers.
Mhm.
Today at 4 p.m. we have a writers workshop in the community room. The writers workshop is designed for teens and adults, and we will be doing everything from practice prompts to working on our own works, as well as doing a group workshop. Again, the writers workshop will be in the community room starting now. Thank you.
excellent, let's go.
Nice, I know.
So anyway, so a call, so you can buy this right to buy it. So now, if you have the right to buy something at 105, and the market is actually trading at 115, then it's worth $10, isn't it? So if you paid 50 cents for that right, because you only had 2 weeks ago, and you paid 50 cents, and 2 weeks from now it's worth $10, then you made $9.50 for each contract, right, for each share. And when you buy an option, it always has 100 shares. So one contract, 50 cents, 100 shares cost you $50. Well, that $100 is now worth, 100 shares is worth $10 apiece. Then your $50 bet is now worth 1,000. So one morning I woke up and I had 200 contracts on a company called Applied Materials that I'd made a bet on, and the stock had closed the prior day at 98. I had these 200 contracts, and when it opened at 120, and I was up $250,000 that morning. That's a nice day.
Yeah.
My wife came downstairs, and because the market opens at 6:30 on the West Coast, she came down at 7 to take care of the kids. And I talked to her about it, whether we'd keep the stock or sell it, because I could have sold it at a profit, but I'd already taken a lot of money because I'd been trading it for about a month, and I'd been already putting money in my pocket, so I was already ahead. And I had about, I don't know, $40,000 or $50,000 was sitting on the table, right? But I was pretty sure that it was going to be worth a lot more. It would be in excess of what my option prices were, because they were reporting numbers that morning, and they had just raised a bunch of money, $500 million, and I'm a financial guy, and you don't raise money and then report bad numbers, because then the street hates you forever, because they just gave you a bunch of money. If you disappoint them, they're very unhappy. And this is a reputable company, Applied Materials. So when they reported numbers, they beat what the estimates were by about 25 cents. I mean, they really blew the doors off. That's why the stock closed 98, opened at 118. so when I looked at it, I go, oh, that's just, so my wife comes down and she goes, well, how'd you do? I said, well, we're up about $250,000. She goes, what? I said, yeah, we're up about $250,000. She went, okay. She didn't say any more. She went upstairs. She was in her pajamas. Went upstairs. She got. I guess she got dressed, and unbeknownst to me, because we went out later on after breakfast, after I sold the position, and I went outside, and on the driveway there were pennies all over the driveway. And the reason there were pennies is because I always said to her, penny, find a penny, pick it up. All the day you'll have good luck. So she put out all these pennies on the driveway as a kind of yeah.
A joke, like a gesture. Yeah.
2 days later, we went down to the bank. 3 days later, went down to the bank, paid off the house. big change in life, right? And that's what ultimately brought us up here. She decided at that point she wanted to raise the kids in a different area, so we moved up here. So, I don't know, am I on track with you? Are you getting what you wanted from me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing okay?
Yeah, you're doing good. You're doing
Yeah?
good. Yeah.
Okay.
This is about you, so yeah.
So that was just a story.
Mm-hmm.
But how I end up here is 6 months later, about a year later, I gotta pay the taxes. So I got it up, I ran the thing up to about $1.25 million, like I said, and then I made a bet on IBM in June or July, which turned out to be wrong. And I lost about 100 and a half, because I was looking to get that next million pretty quick, right? So I put up even more, right? You got money, you're playing with the house's money. So I put up about I guess I had about 100 and a half or whatever. Anyway, it didn't work. And then I found myself at about October or so with just $1 million left. I'd lost about $250,000 trying to get aggressive. And I decided, I'm gonna quit. I need to work on the taxes. I'll figure out, now I need to figure out how I can keep it. Right? So I spent about several months trying to figure out how to keep that money and not have to pay it out to the government, set up a foundation, do all the things. But it turns out you can't do that. You can't do it and shelter the income that you generate, which I kind of knew, but I just thought maybe I could figure out a way to do it. So the only way to do it, to avoid paying the taxes, was to cheat. Just not report the income.
Right.
And it turns out you can do that with options, because the brokerage accounts don't report your option activity to the IRS. But if they find out, then you get to go to jail.
Right.
And you get to pay huge fines, right? So April 15th comes along, and I decided that's not gonna work. We moved up here, we bought a nice house. And I remember my two sons, at that point they were, I guess 15 and 11 or something like that. So I woke them up, I'd written the checks, and I handed them the two checks, and I said, I want you to understand something. These two checks, that's everything your mom wanted. This is part of your college education. This is my retirement, et cetera, et cetera. One of them's made out to the state of California for $120,000. The other one's made out to the federal government for $340,000. They're my partner. They get half of what we generate, and that's the way it is. And I said, but I want you to understand something. The only reason I might be doing this is because not doing it means I might end up in jail, and I don't want you to have to explain to your friends. I don't want.
Is that like S corp? Is that what you're kind of talking about, or is that something else?
S corps is just a different version of a company. You have C corporations are the big giant corporations. You have sole proprietorships, individuals. You have partnerships, and then you have C corps. C corps get treated like a corporation, and they get to take expenses and do the things that corporations do, but they generally tend to be small operations as opposed to larger companies. So it's just a vehicle that's been created by the attorneys who run the country to fool around with the tax law. See, the tax law wasn't designed before I go there. So that situation is actually what triggered me to start thinking about this whole tax deal, because I felt like paying half of what I owned, right, or what I had accumulated, not knowing that I would ever be able to create it again. It's one thing if you're an actor and you get to do another movie and you're getting another $5 million or $10 million, whatever you can get for it. But when you happen to be fortunate enough to have God look down on you and say, you're blessed today, and not knowing that you'll ever be able to do it again, it's a pretty huge deal, and it's a lot of money. Because like I said, it is all of those things. Like you put the money into a pension fund, you put it to annuity, so it's there for your retirement, right? You send your kids to college, everything you needed, but the money gets taken by the government, by the federal and state governments, because that's the law. So I got to thinking about it then, and then I got asking myself, one day, 1983, when I basically kind of got into my career. You know, you got an economy that's doing $2 to $3 trillion a year in GDP, and then later you're sitting here at $15, $20 trillion, but you still got all this poverty in the country. And you ask yourself, how does that happen? How do you go from very little to having this huge amount of economic prosperity but you got so many people who are not participating. And then one day I realized it comes down to the tax structure. And in particular, it comes down to Social Security and who funds it. That's what it comes down to. The fact that you have to pay Social Security to take care of me instead of Elon Musk means not only do you lose the opportunity to create a bunch of wealth, right? But you also then rob your children of the opportunity to create a bunch of wealth because somebody has to pay you back. So, my view, why am I taxing you, knowing that you're going to have to get paid back by your kids at some point in the future, just like you're now having to pay me back? Why don't I take the money from Elon Musk? Not only does he have all the money, it's not going to create a hardship for him, but we don't have to pay him back.
Right.
It's a tax. It's a legitimate tax on his income. Why don't we tax it? And the answer is because the tax law doesn't exist for us. It exists for them, right? It's been created for them,
Right.
and that's the argument I'm trying to do. So that's how I kind of come to be where I am in
Okay.
terms of this whole thing. And it's kind of a quest. It goes back to that thing I was telling you when I was in high school. You want to change the country. You want to do something there. That's 60 years ago. It's 50 years ago. Right? So now I'm 70. I've only got so much game left. This is something that actually would mean a huge opportunity for millions and millions of Americans, but specifically for my children, my grandchildren, and it actually restores the country, in my judgment, to what it is the founders originally had intended. So I guess I'm fulfilling my childhood or my youthful aspirations,
Right.
but it's not necessarily something that's likely to happen. I mean, we're talking a huge long shot here, aren't we?
Yeah.
We are.
Yeah.
It's kind of quixotic. You know quixotic? Don Quixote?
Oh, I
Until the windmills, you know? Anyway, it's kind of that. Chasing the impossible dream. Yeah.
Okay, and then, let's see, so we did, okay, so, what was your first experience with advocacy and political activism? Did your experience impact the way you vote or present political policies?
That's a really good question. That actually happened when I was thinking about it. We'd moved over to Lincoln. We'd sold the house in Granite Bay. We bought a ranch out in Lincoln because my wife always wanted a piece of property and she wanted horses and she wanted to do that whole thing. So the boys had gone up to college. My daughter had gotten into riding after we moved out of the Silicon Valley. At that point, we had 3 horses. And they were being stabled about 1.5 miles from where we lived. And we had this big house, 5,000 square foot plus, nice everything, nicely manicured, paid for by the market, right? And but it wasn't what she wanted, and things were different. And the boys, like I said, had gone off. So we decided, well, okay, we've been here almost 9 years, so we went and bought this 10-acre piece of property over in Lincoln. And I started thinking, well, what am I going to do other than take care of the animals and work on the property? I'll get involved. And I'd worked for AAA, selling life insurance for a couple of years. And then I decided that I'd go off and do something on my own. So I'd open my own firm, doing life insurance. So I decided to go to the Chamber of Commerce meeting in the city of Lincoln to introduce myself and become part of that whole thing. And they happened to be having a presentation that morning by the city of Lincoln. And my wife had worked for the city, and the city at this time, now think about it, it's 2010, right? 2009, 2010. And the city is struggling, right? Just like we all were struggling. If you remember 2009, 2010, the banking system had undergone this crash. Obama had just come into the presidency, right? So he was kind of in charge of things. And the city wasn't making enough revenue to pay all the bills. And so they were making a pitch to the Chamber of Commerce that morning that I happened to attend. And their whole pitch was about, we need to generate more revenue because we have all the operating expenses and da-da-da. And so at the end of the presentation, I thought, well, that's really interesting. What are you doing to cut your expenses? Right? I mean, I'm in business. I'm running these companies. When my businesses got in trouble in the Silicon Valley, whatever companies I was involved in, first thing you have to do is try to figure out how you cut your expenses, which means sometimes you let go of staff, you cut here, you reduce salaries, benefits, whatever it is you gotta do to continue to deliver whatever it is you're trying to do and keep the organization going. But they didn't wanna do that, they wanted to raise the taxes on the people who were in the community. So I was asking them, what are you doing? And the response was, well, if you stop by the office, we'll be more than happy to share that with you. They didn't wanna have that conversation. So that was about the time the Tea Party was. You familiar with the Tea Party? You remember the Tea Party? Kind of came, very conservative group. So they happened to be having a meeting that night as well. So I'd heard about it. So I thought I'd go to the Tea Party meeting. Well, the Tea Party meeting was made up of a bunch of very conservative people, probably 20 people in the room. And they were talking about all the problems that needed to be done and issues they had with the city and going on and on. And I said, well, folks, why don't you do this? You're all very capable people. Why don't you put your resumes together and hand them in, and you can volunteer to take all these jobs that are now being filled by these people. And they thought that was a great idea. Now, I thought it was just a stunt. I was just kind of kidding around. And then I realized that it wasn't going to go anywhere. We would collect it, and it would be kind of just a lot of noise without doing anything. So I got into the books over the weekend and tore the books apart for the city, kind of looking at the different numbers, and I went, the city's paying 60 cents of every dollar that it's paying an employee to cover all these benefits that are associated, that they've negotiated on all these contracts. This is ridiculous. I've never had this level of operative. They're paying for all kinds of stuff they shouldn't be paying for. What are they doing that for? So, next thing you know, I'm starting a group called Team 10 in Lincoln, and we took on the city council to kill the utility tax until they told us what was going on in the business. So I think that was about February, March 2010. The election was in November. So I went out and recruited like 10 people that were in the city through this Tea Party thing and whatever else. And next thing you know, we were putting together our own plan and our own proposal. And what was 2 or 3 people showing up at the city council now has a couple hundred people sitting there wanting to know what you people are doing, right? And we ran our own candidates for the city council, and we replaced I think 2 or 3, if I recall. And I didn't even live in the town. I lived in Newcastle, and but I was the guy who kind of put it together and kind of pushed it forward for a while. And we defeated the utility tax and replaced the mayor and a couple of other people. And then that opened up the books, and then 50 people who did live in the city got together and started pulling this thing, tearing it apart and trying to figure out what's going on. So that was kind of my first foray into it. And I became uninvolved because, like I said, I didn't live in the town. And there was always a lot of anger about the fact that I had gotten into this thing because I wasn't a member of the community. So those people who were in favor of supporting the council and all these things really resented the fact that I was there. And so there was a lot of angst over the whole thing too.
Yeah.
But that was kind of the first time I think I got involved really in what was going on from a political perspective. And I really don't have any interest in being a mayor or being involved in the city council. I just think that people ought to have a right to have an input into the process, and I don't think the city council ought to turn to the people and say it's none of your business, which is basically what they were telling us.
Right.
So the mayor made some comment to me early on in the thing, because I said, hey, I'm not trying to create any issues here, I just kind of want to know what's happening. He says, hey, you just go over there, the people will talk to you, and you just kind of shine the whole thing on. And I thought, okay, so that's how it is. And so I just thought, okay, well, we'll have the conversation then. We'll find out what's going on. And it turned out that I think to be a pretty good exercise. I don't know that the city of Lincoln was any better for it when it was all said and done in terms of the numbers or those kinds of things. I don't know that they came up with better solutions for the problems, but people were more active in what was going on in the city for a period of time. I haven't been back for a year, so I don't know whether or not it's hard to stay involved, right?
Right.
People have jobs and lives and things like that.
Yeah, it takes like a lot of commitment. But it's really cool that you got to, go in there and kind of like start something just to get people's attention too and get them more like involved in the community too. So that's pretty cool.
I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's, if you don't, it's real simple. This country is, again, it's about self-governance, and if you don't pay attention to what's going on in the country and you don't get involved, then the people who are involved will make sure that they get taken care of and you won't. The basic tenet of capitalism, right? Going back to that economics, basic tenet is this. If each individual were to pursue their own self-interest without government intervention, they'll be led as if by an invisible hand to achieve the greatest good for everybody. Because that process of negotiation, you representing your interests, me representing mine, we working out, coming to an arrangement, a bargain. That bargain is applicable not just to you and me, but to all the people that you do business with. Because now you've got a way to run your business, and that's how businesses kind of get started. So that's the basic tenet, but it requires that parties represent themselves and their own interest. You see, you actually have to be selfish to some extent. You have to say, this is important to me. Tell me what's important to you. Let's see if we can come to an arrangement on how we continue to move forward in time. That's democracy. That's part of the whole Constitution of the United States. It's what the founders, that's what's embedded in the Constitution, is this idea that people will represent their interests. And they do that through public representatives that they elect, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just went through an election. We call it a democracy, right? It's not a democracy, it's a republic. We hire people to do a job, right? And they're supposed to represent our interests against the other forces out there that would otherwise direct activities. We were talking about China. Who controls China? 7 men. 7 men can control the lives of 1.4 billion people. Right? So, and in Russia, it's kind of the same kind of thing. There's only one country in the world that has really ever tried to give ordinary people the right to govern themselves. But if you abdicate that right because you don't get involved, then the people who are involved will take and make sure they get taken care of, and you'll end up with nothing. That's why you pay the taxes that LeBron James should pay. Because he's got people representing him and you don't, right? So.
All right, next question. Can you recall a moment in your early life when you realized the power of policy change? But I think you covered that in your last story, unless you want to answer.
No, I think that's exactly. I think your question dovetails very nicely what we were just talking about.
Okay.
It's about you representing your interests, because we'll just take the opposite, okay? Socialism, communism, right? The basic tenet of socialism is that from each according to their ability, to each according to their work, okay? So that's the modus of the wealth distribution. You give the best you got, man, woman, child, best you got. Someone will decide what your needs are, or what your work is worth, and then they'll give it to you, right? So the bureaucracy is then in control. They decide how the wealth gets distributed. It's not you advocating for you based on your self-interest. It's a group of folks in the bureaucracy telling you this is what you're entitled to for what you did, right? In that environment, the good news is probably LeBron James doesn't make $100 million a year. That's not so good for him. The bad news is that when the economy goes through a cycle, and it always does, right? There's always ups and downs. Something always comes along to disrupt whatever you were moving for. There's good things and bad things in life that happen. Those 2 hurricanes that just went through Florida and Tennessee and Georgia, all those people whose lives have been, just turned upside down by these events. That whole thing changes where they are at, right? And if the government is the only source of them being able to recover, then they've got a real tough road to hoe. Because if that were to impact the entire society, when country turns down, the nature of people is to do what? Take care of themselves first. So if all the wealth is controlled by the people in the bureaucracy, then the first people they're going to take care of themselves when things get bad. And the ordinary people, the people who are not involved in it, are going to be left behind. That's why it doesn't work. Because when you start to leave ordinary people behind, then it just continues to implode on itself, right? It just gets worse and worse and worse. But the people at the top, they take the resources they need, and everybody else starves, struggles, fights, whatever it is. And of course, they take away your guns, so you have no ability to fight. They load you up in a boxcar and take you down the trail and say, here, this is what you got. Don't like it? Too bad. Right? So capitalism gives you the right to argue for your self-interest. People say, well, if you're arguing for your self-interest, then you're selfish, right? If you're selfish, then that's bad. But the truth is, when this all was put together, 1776, when the Wealth of Nations was written by Adam Smith, and he had this idea that became quote-unquote capitalism. This is also a time where you have lots of people, and most of the people in the world are people of faith, right? Western civilization. That's what Western civilization is based on, Judeo-Christian values. It's integral to who we are and what we believe in, right? It's that individual kind of idea. You make choices. Are you a person of faith? It's okay if you're not.
I mean, I know I grew up with religion, but I'm not very religious myself. But
Okay. So, I'm far afield here a little bit, maybe from where you want to go, but I'm happy to have this conversation if you're still interested. Should I keep going, or would you? I want to make sure we get through your
it's
list of
almost
things.
4:23. Yeah. Let me ask. Let's just go through the questions real quick.
Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, nothing. No, I can, as you can see, I
Yeah.
can find the tangent. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Won't take me long.
Okay, so let's see. Did we answer that? Who or what inspired you to run for office? What motivates you to get your messages to the public?
So, after traveling the country and talking to lots of people and encouraging them to get involved, I decided that I would stop in and, like I said, talk to congressmen, talk to governors, whatever, try to get the message to these folks, because they're in positions of responsibility. They can make it happen. I have a great idea. I want to share it with you. You'll take my idea. You'll run with it. You'll be a hero. Everything's great. I don't care if I get the credit. You take the credit. It's all right with me. It's a great idea. Your people are going to love you. You're here in South Dakota, Christie. You're in South Dakota. You got 800,000 people who live in the state of South Dakota, right? Of the 800,000 people, the median income there's about $60,000. I'm saying to you, go to your people. They already don't pay state income tax. Go to them and say, I'm going to fight for your right not to pay federal income taxes until you make more than $120,000 a year. All that money's yours. We put it back in your pocket. 90% of the population of South Dakota is going to say, Christie, thank you, right? You're my new best friend, right? And then you throw the icing on the cake and you say, you take that. By the way, that solves the problem today. We want to fix it for you for your entire life. We want to give you a reason to get up every day and go to work. We want to give you the opportunity to share in the bounty that is America, so that you live that American dream. So I want you to take, from the time you're 16 years of age, that 15% that you and your employer pay into Social Security, put it in your own tax-free Roth IRA. Put it there for 54 years. Invest in the greatness of the country, right? Invest right alongside the wealthiest people in the country. Invest alongside the public pension funds. Because in 20 years, the country will continue to grow, because that's what America is. And there's no reason that we believe we can't make it grow. So why don't you share in that growth, right? Be an investor. Be a working capitalist. Take your 15% from the time you're 16 to the time you're 70. Rise to the level of your incompetence, which we all do. But leverage the greatness of everybody around you, right? Leverage the greatness of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and all the people who are going to do artificial intelligence and robotics and who will bring this manufacturing onshore back to the United States. Invest in all those businesses. You don't have to run them. Just use your money, put it to work like the wealthiest people do. Don't let me take it from you. Because by the time you get to be 70 years of age, invested at 9%, which is the historical rate of return for 100 years, you're going to be a multi-millionaire. I'm serious. Even if you don't get to be this chief executive officer, because you contributed and you went to work every day and you did the right things, right? You did all those things to not only do good for yourself and your family, pursuing your own self-interest. You also got involved in your communities, and you can make your community stronger, and that makes your state stronger, and that's just great. Run across the entire country, right? So that's the theory behind it. right? Makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So who doesn't want 120,000 tax free? Would you like 120,000 tax free?
Yeah.
That's okay. You don't have to pay any income tax.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, if you can take the 15% that you're giving me and put it in your own investment account, isn't that a great idea too? So I just became your new best friend, didn't I?
Mm-hmm.
I did, didn't I? Yeah, I just changed your life. But I need to get, because they took the money from me and my 80 million best friends for the last 50 years, I have to get paid by somebody. And if you stop paying me, you have to get the money from somebody else. So I want to take it from the people who have the money. The people who have the money actually have $102 trillion of the total 152 trillion. They control 67% of the wealth. And the reason they have 67% of the wealth is because they keep investing their money, right? They don't need all the money they've got, so they just keep investing it. They're doing what I want you to do, right? So I'm going to tax them instead of taxing you. The reason I'm going to do that is because, unlike you, your kids don't have to pay that back. So if I'm going to take $50 trillion from you, which is what I plan to do over the next 20 years, I'm taking $1.6 trillion a year, me and my 80 million best friends. That's what you pay in Social Security taxes as a group. That 1.6 trillion is going to grow to 3.6 trillion by the time you get to 2045. And that's because the number of people who are going to need this benefit is going to grow from 80 million today to 100 to 110 million in 20 years. Because there's 150 of you who are paying in, and you're going to be retiring. We're going to live longer, so right? So the bottom line is more and more people are going to need a handout from the government, which means we need more people working to pay that bill under the current system. But if I change the system and I change the funding source to the people at the top, then you can create 135 to 150 trillion of wealth over the next 20 years. And then you don't need to turn around to your kids and ask them for $100 trillion. So now they're saving and investing their own money. They're living the American dream. And the people we take the money from, we don't have to pay them back.
Mm-hmm.
We just wiped out $100 trillion of debt. By doing what? Letting you save and invest your own money?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
It does, doesn't
Yeah.
it? And it's so that's kind of the story. And the way I got into it is that I just, like I said, one day I realized that there's a reason why poor people are poor. It's complicated. You know what it is? Crystal, you know why poor people are poor? You know why?
Why?
It's complicated.
It's complicated.
They got no money.
They don't got money.
They got no money. You know, and you got no money because every time you get paid, I rob you of 15% of every dollar you make from the time you're 16 to the time you're 70. And if you're one of 70 million people in this country who makes less than $55,000 a year, fourth grade arithmetic, you go from working poor to retired poor, and then you need to be taken care of. But if we change the equation and you take that 15% and you invest that money instead, then you get to go from working poor to retired wealthy, financially independent. You don't need any help from the federal government. You don't need state. You don't need Social Security. You don't need Medicare. You don't need food stamps. You don't need housing assistance. That's what we want as a country where we're self-governing. We want a limited government. We want the government to get smaller. But you can't get the government smaller if you continue to perpetuate the system, which is guaranteed over the next 20 years to take you from 70 million people who are dependent, or 80 million, to 100 to 110 at a higher cost. All you're doing is expanding the size of the government, the scope that they exist, and the number of people who are dependent upon it.
Mm-hmm.
The only way you can remove that dependency is to give people the opportunity to pursue their own self-interest and share in the growth and prosperity of the country. What's wrong with that? I think it's a pretty good story, right? So I ran on that message. I went down to Bakersfield to run against Kevin McCarthy because he was going to be, I knew he would become Speaker of the House if the Republicans win. He's in a conservative district. He's been there 17 years. I figured he was ambitious, might like to be the President of the United States someday. So I would go down there since I haven't been able to reach out to him, and he's not reaching out to me, and nobody in the Republican Party has talked, the people I've talked to are pursuing this. So I'll go down and I'll put it in his face. I will run against him for 30 days. So I did. I went down there in 2022 and I talked to actually members of his staff because I ran into him. I shared the story with him, told him I'll be happy to talk to Congressman McCarthy about it if he wants. Thinking that when he won, because he was going to win, guaranteed, he would take the idea from June to November and he would make that idea his own, put his own stamp on it, and then start pushing it around the country. And he would take the millions of dollars that had been contributed to his campaign, which he then gives to all these different people who are running all over the country, right, as a donation to add to their campaigns so they can win, right? So that, And what he's basically doing is spreading the money around so that when the time comes up to vote for Speaker of the House, all these people who won now owe him because he put up money to help them succeed. And that's how the Speaker of the House gets elected these days. Right? All these things you learn along the way. I hadn't figured this out, but anyway, the reason for running was to actually get McCarthy the idea, test it with the market, meet some people, just go have some fun. I'd never run for an office before, so I thought, hey, what the heck? I'll go become a congressman, right?
Yeah.
In an area where I don't live, where nobody knows me, right? I'll just go down there for 30 days. I'll shake a bunch of hands and share my story and see what people think.
Yeah.
Turned out they liked it. It was okay. I thought I'd get about 1,500 votes because I'm a one-man show. I got over 5,000. Right? I get 5% of the vote. It's pretty good. But,
Yeah, I saw. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
Oh yeah, no, I saw online on I think it was like Ballotpedia or something like that. They said that it was like actually I don't know if I'm wrong, but it was like in the 200,000. So I think it was more than what you're saying. It was more than that.
But in terms of the vote,
For votes, I can't recall which one, but just.
well,
Votes alone.
I'm not there yet. I got 5,000 votes in Bakersfield,
Okay.
and the total vote was, I think, he got about 83,000.
Oh.
And then he ends up running against the Democrat down there, which meant he didn't have to run.
Oh, okay.
If she'd have been smart, she'd have stolen my idea. Her name was Marissa Wood. If she'd have sat down and thought about what I was talking about, she'd realize this is actually almost more of a Democrat policy than it is a Republican policy. You know how I know that? You know who Juan Williams is? He's on Fox News. So when I was in Milwaukee, walking the streets, talking to people, handing out flyers and stuff, and then just introducing myself. Cause I like telling the story. So anyway, I'm out there and I'm having this conversation. I see Juan standing on the street down there talking to somebody. So I thought, he's a Democrat. I probably shouldn't go down and talk to him about this because this is an idea, and I've always been worried that because I'm a conservative, I would prefer that the Democrats not adopt the platform, right? Because I think they'll win with it. I think they'll beat anybody with it. Right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to give them the keys to victory, do I?
Right.
But I said, this has been going on a long time, and the Republicans aren't stepping up. So maybe the best thing to do is create the competition, right? So I went down and introduced myself to one. I told him I was a Republican in town, and I had this really interesting idea, and I handed him my flag. I said to him, this is what I'm all about, and I just wanted to get your feedback on it. So we're standing, we're chatting, and I'm giving him the story. I get about a minute and a half into the discussion. He stops me cold, looks at me, he goes, what'd you say your name was? I said, Jim McCollum. He said, did you say you're a Republican? I said, yeah. He said, this is a Democrat idea. You shouldn't be talking about this. This is what we ought to be talking about. And I said, yeah, I know. That's why I hesitate to give it to you. But I also know that this is the bridge. You see, this is the bridge where ordinary people in America, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, right, or independents, if they believe in America, if they believe in self-government, if they believe in freedom, faith, fraternity, fidelity, if they believe in American capitalism, but they have different views on some things that put them into these different parties, but they're still Americans, right? They're still Americans. This is what brings us together. It's the unity platform. 80% of the population, I believe, will benefit directly from what I'm proposing. And I'm going to continue to push it until somebody who wants it picks it up and runs with it. And it is now evolved into a more complete platform. So I ran for just to finish it before I get on a sidetrack, I want you to get to your next question if you want. But I ran for the Senate because McCarthy didn't do anything. He didn't run with it, he didn't do anything with it. So I had a conversation with a gentleman over at Maidu Library, actually on a Saturday afternoon. He was about 5 years my senior. He's terminally ill. He obviously wanted to have a conversation. He's alone. We ended up spending about an hour together, talking politics, talking about a variety of things. I'm telling him my story. He hates Trump with a passion. I mean, he just hates him, right? So I'm trying to decide at that point whether I'm going to do anything and maybe get involved in the Senate campaign. And I'm telling my story. And about every 15 minutes he goes off onto a tirade about how he hates Trump. Got no use for him whatsoever, blah, blah, blah. And tells me about all the people in the past, but Trump, just absolutely not. So about an hour goes by and he didn't move on. So I said, George, I gotta go, but I just wanted to run an idea by you. I said, remember the last debate? And he said, yeah. I said, do you remember when Biden turned to Trump and said to him, I don't care about the value of the stock market. Mr. Trump, it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to the people I represent. People I represent are working people. They don't have any money in the stock market. You're about the stock market. You're about all those rich people. That's who you care about. That's not who I care about. I said to him, imagine Trump turning to him at that moment in time and saying, you know, Joe, I was thinking about that. And it occurred to me, after having done some reading, that we've been doing this thing wrong for a long time. And in my next term, and I want you to support me in this, Joe, when I get elected, because I am going to get elected. I want you to support the proposition that we give everybody $120,000 in income tax free, and we'll let them take that 15% that they now have to put into Social Security. We'll let them invest it so they can invest in the market too, so they can share in that growth and prosperity. And you and I are going to pick up the taxes going forward for these people instead of them. That's what we're going to do, Joe. Will you support me in that when I'm president? Because that's what I'm offering the people of the United States today. And he looked at me, Julie, he looked at me, he got really mad. He got about this far from my face. He said some really nasty words to me. I won't repeat them for the camera. But he called me some really bad stuff. And I said, I backed up. I said, George, what's the matter? He goes, you son of a bitch. If he'd have done that, I'd have had to vote for him.
Oh my gosh.
And that's when I knew I was right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I decided to run for the Senate.
Yeah, that's
Speak.
a good test.
Well, and I've been trying to persuade Trump, even in this last campaign. I'm writing online. I'm trying to get him to pick this thing up and run with it because he got 75 million votes, right? She got 70 million votes, give or take. So he says he's got a mandate because the Electoral College, right, is with him. He got 30 out of the 50 states voted for him. So yes, he had a massive victory relative to, right? We've got 4 more Republicans. We got 4 more people in the Senate. I think the total count's 54, 55 now. We were at 49, so we picked up several seats. So we have control of the Senate. The House is much narrower, not as many House seats. So I hoped I want 70%. I want 70% of the Senate. I want 70%. I want the 1865 Congress so that we can fix the country. Because I'm concerned about where your country is going. I really am. You may have, I don't know what your political views are. You know, we can have that conversation, but I'm concerned about the direction of the country and where we're headed for the reasons we've discussed. And I believe that in order to get done what needs to get done, you need 70% of the population with you. It's just like running a business, right? I'm running a business. I got 200 people working with me, right? I'm with the management team, and we're struggling. And because we're struggling, there's a lot of dissension within the organization. We got 30% of the people in the organization getting up and going that way every day. They're not in favor, or they're in favor of doing things like that. And you got 30% who want to go that way. And then you got 40% who are just confused. Because you don't know where you're going. You're not in any direction, right? You're struggling with trying to figure out why you hit the wall and how you fix it. The 40 people that sit in the middle, they just show up for work every day, but they don't know why they're there necessarily. What you have to do if you're going to succeed is you have to get 70% at least of the working force working toward the same goals. Everybody's got to be working on the same thing. Little League coach. If I got guys who can't hit the cutoff and don't know and don't want to pay attention, then we don't play as a team. You got to play as a team. The country, America it's one big business, the biggest business in the history of the world. We've got 28 trillion, $27 trillion gross domestic product. There's no reason this country can't grow over the next 20 years at 5% with, assuming there's 2% inflation, the real growth of the country, there's no reason it can't grow by 3% year after year after year with that 2% inflation. The Federal Reserve can manage that. They don't do a good job today because they're there reacting to all the stupidity of Congress. And the reason Congress is stupid is because they don't have any priorities that they work against. They need 2 objectives, so I'm giving them 2. One of the objectives is 5% growth, right? That'll get us to $70 trillion in GDP, in 20 years. That's a tremendous amount of prosperity for all of America, assuming we share the wealth, right? But we have to get the debt from 130%, which is where it is today, because we've spent money we didn't have over the last 20 years. We've got to get that back to 70%. So we got to reduce the debt to GDP ratio every year as we're growing the economy. So we got to go down by 2.4% over here as we go up by 5% over here. And when we get to 2045, the economy will be $70 trillion. The debt to GDP will be 70%. The value of the Dow Jones Industrial Average with a $49 trillion of debt, right? 49 trillion? How do they get the number? 70% of 70, right? So that's $49 trillion. We have $36 trillion of debt today. That means they can't spend any more than $13 trillion more over the next 20 years. They just spent 25 over the last 15 they didn't have. I'm telling you, you got no more than 13. That's it. That means you got to cut your deficit every year to 13, 14, divided by, make it easy, to 700 billion. You're running $2 trillion worth of deficit. You got to cut it to 700 billion. You heard Elon Musk, right? You heard of this program that he and Vivek are working on, right? Called Doge, the Department of
Doge.
Government.
Oh,
Department
really?
of Government.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
Oh yeah, this is what they're. He's
Oh,
all
boy.
into this. They're gonna go in. They're gonna take a cleaver to the government. In theory, that's what they tell us they're gonna do. I'll believe it when I see it. I'm 70 years old, and there's been this conversation before, and it hasn't gone anywhere we wanted to. So I say, okay, fine. I support that 100%, because that's exactly the numbers. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe part of my banging on them every day on Twitter and hitting them and saying, got to do this, got to do this. Maybe this is where Doge partly comes from, because I'm copying all these people on this thing, right? I'm getting hits. Somebody's reading it, right? And
So what's the Doge?
it starts for.
I know it's a crypto coin.
Oh yeah, so
Yeah.
that's where Elon comes up with the name, right? Because he's the Doge guy, right? But so Trump just created a new department under the direction of Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, right? Those two guys. Vivek's worth 900 million. Elon's worth 260 billion, right? So these two guys are supposed to go in and they're supposed to make recommendations about how to, within 2 years, on how to cut back on government spending and actually how to make it happen so we can get back down to these numbers that I'm talking about. They're arguing they can cut $2 trillion of spending so that we're now balancing the budget. I don't believe it. Maybe they will. I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. But that government's entrenched. You got all these people who work there, and they don't want to lose their jobs. And they got lawyers, and they got senators and congressmen. They got a lot of people representing their interests, right? That's why every time we go to try to solve this spending problem, we can't get it done. Because there's no incentive to get it done. Do you understand? There's no incentive to cut spending. You know why there's no incentive to cut spending?
How come?
The reason there's no spending is because the people, best example I can think of, we spent, like I said, $25 trillion over the last 15 years, more than we took in, okay? The amount of wealth that was created during that period of time was 96 trillion. So we created $96 trillion of wealth because the government spent $25 trillion it didn't have. That's called stimulus, right? It's Keynesian economics, right? Prime the pump. So you spend more money, you put money in the pockets of people, they go out and they consume things that causes the economy to grow, right? The market goes high, right? Goes up higher because the country's growing, right? The GDP is growing, right? But the debt grew too. It went from 10 to 35, right? So instead of taxing the people at the top, the $25 trillion to cover the expenses that the government was spending more than what it had, they just went to Uncle Sam just went to the bank and borrowed the money, right? So they borrow the money, give it to you, you spend it, right? That creates consumption, that causes the economy to grow, everything's going good. The stock market goes up, who owns all the assets? Do you own the assets? No, you got no assets. You don't have any money to invest. You know why? You give me your 15%, you don't get to play. But the people who had $37 trillion in the net worth in 2009 when all this spending began, their 37 trillion grew to 102 trillion. Right? They added $66 trillion of wealth because the government spent $25 trillion it didn't have. And the Federal Reserve supported that effort by buying up the debt to keep the interest rates artificially low, which caused the housing prices to explode. So you got low interest rates driving the housing market, low interest rates driving the stock market, and the people who own the wealth got $66 trillion richer. Do they have any incentive to stop spending? That worked out pretty good, didn't it? You know, it's great, right? If I can get you, I gotta find 300 people. That's what I got. I got 365 people. That's all I need, who want to have dinner with me every night. And the agreement is you pick up the bill. How much money can I save going to dinner over a period of year if I got 365 people to pick up the bill? Right? That's the whole deal. That's how you get rich. You get somebody else to pay the tab, right? And then you get to invest the tax savings. Does that make sense? Pretty good game, huh?
Yeah.
So, how are we doing?
We're doing good.
We doing good?
Yeah.
Have we got, what's this thing say? up
It's an
there?
hour.
Does it say? Is it still clicking? Is it still
Yeah,
going?
it's
Oh,
still
excellent.
going.
All right, so we're doing
okay,
good.
let's
We didn't
see.
kill it or anything. Are
Um,
we having fun?
yeah.
Am I doing all right?
No, you're doing
Am I
great.
getting an interesting interview?
Yeah.
So you know what you have to learn how to do?
Uh-huh.
No, well, you're in public relations, so that's different. But if you were in the media, you know what you have to do? I had this conversation like sometime with a couple of young lady journalists. They took my hours worth of conversation and whittled it down to like about, well, if you saw my videos with the, you know, what is that? I got 40 seconds out of an hour?
Yeah, that's probably what this is gonna be like too. So I'm like gonna have to listen and.
Yeah.
But it's cool. It's fun. I like it.
But I tell you what, if this was actually a TV interview, I learned how to do TV interviews. You know how you do them? You walk in, they ask you the question, you give them your minute and a half speech on what it is you gotta do, and then you get a stomachache and you walk out and you say, gee, I'm sorry, I don't feel it.
Oh, that's a good one.
And then they got the minute and a half you want them to talk about. Anyway,
That's good.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's see. Step by step, how will you plan to reduce the taxation for working Americans? But I don't know if you want to explain that.
Well, I'm not gonna do
specifically?
it. I'm not gonna
No.
do it. You're gonna do it.
Oh, I'm gonna do it.
You're gonna do it.
Okay.
You're gonna take this, and I'm gonna give you my card. I got cards in my car. I'm gonna give you my card, and then, well, you've already been on my page, right? Are you following me on Twitter? Did you follow me? You haven't yet.
No, I like looked. I don't have an account. Well, I made one to look at your
Well,
account,
that's fine.
so now I have one.
Right, so follow
so you'd
me.
be my first follower.
And if you don't want to be known, then you just create a dummy one, right? You make a meme, whatever it is you want to do, right? But this is your voice now, because think about it as your seat at the table. That's how I think of it, right? I write at great length, and I know I'm not reaching lots and lots of people, but it is my seat at the table. This is my opportunity to tell the people who are in charge what I want. And it works as long as they don't get mad at me too much. Because last night I received a note from Twitter saying that my account had been temporarily suspended because I had violated some rules, and I'm reading the rule. I'm trying to figure out which rule I did. But they don't want me sending out, they're calling what I'm doing spam.
Oh, like just yeah.
So now they're not sending my stuff out to the people
Right.
who I'm trying to reach, like the President of the United States, trying to say to him, hey, these are the things you need to be doing, right? So I don't know, maybe they got some complaints. I've been sending it to Elon Musk. He owns Twitter. It could be that Elon said, I don't want to talk about this. I don't want him out there having this conversation, right? So slow him down. And I don't know, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Maybe it's all in my imagination, right?
Yeah.
Your question.
Okay, and let's see. Who are the people who should be paying attention to your message?
Well, ideally, the people who ought to be paying attention, the President of the United States ought to realize that if he got 75 million votes, right? So he's got 70 million people who didn't vote for him, right? A lot of those people are young, like you, right? Okay, so if he came to you today and said, I was talking about no tax on tips, pretty good deal, right? Except you don't get tips, so you didn't benefit from that. No tax on overtime, well, you're not working overtime, but you got 3 jobs, right? That's how you're making ends meet. You're gonna get taxed on all 3 of those jobs. You didn't benefit from that thing, right? No tax on Social Security, well, Warren Buffett's 90 years old, and he's got all the money in the world, and you're not gonna tax his Social Security? Come on, You're not solving anything for him. Yes, for the vast majority, 75 million people, yeah, they're better off because they're not going to be taxed on that income, and they shouldn't be, right? But rather than doing what we do politically in this country, which is slice and dice the country into these various segments, that's where all this pronoun thing comes from. You realize that, right? This pronoun, maybe you don't. Maybe again, it's just my thinking. But if you have 25 pronouns, right, different groups, now you got 22 different really small groups, right? And if you say every one of those groups needs to be represented, now every one of those groups has power, right? Because you're going to select it, right? So what happens is you slice and dice the country into all these little pieces, and you factionalize the whole thing. You've got 1% off against the other, and then that keeps us divided. I'm saying, President Trump, you got 70 million people who didn't vote for you, maybe 30 million of them happen to be under the age of 35. Offer them 120,000 tax-free. Doesn't matter what group they're in. They just signed up because it doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter what your gender is. It doesn't matter what your sexual stupidity might be. They all want 120,000 tax-free, and then sweeten the deal. Tell them you're going to give them the 15% to invest for the next 40 years for their own retirement. Tell them that they got a shot at the brass ring to become financially independent. It turns out, when they get to be 70 years of age, if they haven't amassed enough wealth to take care of themselves, that's okay. There's now going to be a huge number of people up there who have lots of wealth to take care of a much smaller number of people who need help. That means we can take much better care of them without a huge cost to the government, and everybody else will live the American dream. Everybody will be better off in the future. You've got a system, Mr. President, that what you're doing today is you've got a guaranteed system that will have 100 million people in need of government services in 20 years. That shouldn't be your goal in Washington. Your goal in Washington shouldn't be strategically looking forward and saying, how do I support 100 to 110 million people in 20 years? You shouldn't be building a program for that. You ought to be trying to figure out, how do I reduce the number of people who need help from the government in 20 years from 110 down to less than 50? That's what you're supposed to be doing. That's what America's all about. So that's the guy that I need to get to. The reason I have hope for him, and the reason I think it might work, actually he might be receptive to it, even though it goes against his grain, is that he's 77 years old, and he's thinking about his legacy. And he'd like to be that there, thought of as the guys on Mount Rushmore. The guys on Mount Rushmore, when you think about who those people, you ever been to Mount Rushmore? Never seen Washington and Jefferson?
I would love to go.
Yeah, you gotta do that. Absolutely do. So you go there, you look at those four guys up there, and you realize those four men made a huge contribution to the society. You got Washington, who was in the field for 8 years and fighting the war and became the first president. Then it made him king. You know that, right? He was asked if he would serve another term. He said, no. I'm not serving another term. I didn't fight for 8 years to create another monarchy here in the United States. That's not what we fought for. We fought to give ordinary people the right to govern themselves. And this is a citizen government, and you go in and you do your thing and you go home. Right? So find somebody else to do that job. I'm going to stay at Mount Vernon. I'm going to do what I do with it. Right? The country will survive. We've got the right system. If we did the job right, then it'll work. So that was the policy. If you think about it, I was talking about faith, people of faith, being a person of faith. If you think about it, you know the story of how Saul becomes the first king of the Jews? Right? I think it's Samuel, if I remember right. He's the prophet. And Samuel has this vision. He's talking to the people. So he goes and he can talk directly to God. He's got that capability. So he goes to God and he says, God, they want a king. God says, king? They don't need a king. They got me, right? They got all the rules, right? Here's the rules. You live by the rules of civilized behavior. Here's the 10 Commandments. You got me. You love them. You do, love each other. You don't need a king. They said, no, people think they need a king. So God thought, it's okay. So Saul becomes the first king, then followed by David, and blah, 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 blah. When you think about the United States, and you think about what the founding fathers really did, they were trying to give ordinary people the country, or a country that was essentially pre-Saul, or ordinary people, people of faith, right? Mm-hmm. People who cared about themselves and their families and this great country. If they just lived by the rules of civilized behavior and honored the 10 Commandments and did what they could, the government would take care of the House of Representatives would represent the ordinary people. The senators would offer a little more sobriety, if you will, and then you would have an executive who would oversee the thing. But it would be run by the people. And every so often the people would swap out the people who were in charge. And there wouldn't be a lot of money in the government because all the money and what was supposed to end up in the pockets of the individual. That's why there was no income tax in the country until 1913. We had to agree. Men had to agree because you didn't get to vote. Men had to agree that they would allow the government to tax their income. And the only reason they agreed to do it, only reason, is because the government finally said to them, we're not going to tax you. This isn't a tax on you. This is a tax on the wealthiest people in the country. We need to pay off the debts from the Civil War. They own all the assets. They can afford to pay the tax, so they're going to pay the tax. You're making $750 a year. You don't have any money. You're making 30 cents an hour, working 40 hours a week, right? So you don't have any money. But the Carnegies, the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, they've got money, and they own all the assets. So we're going to take the money from them. We have to modify the Constitution to do this. We're going to take the money from them. We're going to pay off all those debts, and then we're going to build out the Navy and the armed services so we can defend ourselves because the world's getting a little crazy. And then we're going to keep building the infrastructure and build out the industry and all those things. And you know who's going to own all that industry? The people we're taking the money from. So they're going to end up being exponentially far wealthier than they are today by simply going through and paying the taxes. So the agreement was, we'll create a real, what they call a narrow-based tax system focused on only the 15 to 20% of the population. They would pay all the taxes. So the standard deduction, first standard deduction, 1913, you can look it up on your phone. The document to fill out your tax return, 4 pages long. Section 19, which is the 20th instruction, section 19 says, if you make less than $3,000 a year, this doesn't apply to you. $3,000. This is where you have to get over that bar before you start paying taxes. This is where everybody's living, right? So the taxes were to be paid by the people at the top. Only problem is, over the last 110 years, Congress never adjusted that $3,000 for inflation. They never normalized it to keep that 4-to-1 relationship, 3,000 to 750, to keep that intact so that ordinary people never had to pay taxes. And so over time, today you have a standard deduction of $14,000. 110 years later, you get a $14,000 single deduction. If you're married, you get twice that. It should be $120,000. That's where I came up with the number. Mm-hmm. Adjusted for inflation, that $3,000 is $95, right? $20 an hour, 2,000 hours a year, right? 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year. $20 an hour, make pizza, right? I used to make it for $1.25. 20 bucks an hour, that's 40 grand, isn't it? 40 times 4 is what, 160. So technically normalized, based on the 1913 agreement, arithmetic, you should have 160. Inflation adjusted, you should have 95. 95 plus 160, 255 divided by 2. That's how I came up with 120,000. I didn't just pull it out of the air. I said, this is what we agreed on. I want the damn deal we agreed on. I don't want to have the argument anymore.
Right.
I just want you to give us what we're entitled to. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's the basis for it. That's why I say the argument is almost irrefutable. Not only do you end up better off, not only does the country wipe out $100 trillion a debt, but we restore the original agreement that we had in place before Congress gave away the right of ordinary people to receive all of their income tax free. Because there are only 3 sources of funding for the federal government, for any government. Only 3 sources. You can tax the wealthy, you can tax the poor, or you can borrow the money for as long as they'll let you borrow it, right? So we're trying to do all 3 simultaneously. That's why we have a $36 trillion debt. We're supposed to have 0. Technically. I mean, I can understand from a financial standpoint why having debt makes sense, but I don't agree with the fact that it ought to be 130% to your GDP. I think it ought to be more manageable than that. Good finance says I want to be easily able to service that debt. So that's why I want 70%. I want to get back to that. I'm willing to give the government some time to get there, but they're a little slow in doing that. So the program consists of basically 3 parts. First, the one that I'm talking about, which is for the individual, 120,000 tax-free. We agreed that's okay, right? Mm-hmm. 15% you're on. That sounds like a pretty good deal too. You're 30 for the next 40 years. Every time you get paid, 15% of every dollar you make just went into your own Roth IRA. right? It's a pretty good deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it grows at 9% and you had $100,000 today, you know the rule of 72? Could have taught you in the fourth grade.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm not a good math person.
Well, people have to stop saying that. But,
Yeah.
but anyway, $100,000. If you had the rule of 72, remember when you were learning long division in the fifth grade?
That was a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you can do fifth grade, right? Think back to
Mhm.
you're 30,
Yeah.
right? So let's see. This is what year is this? 2024,
Yes.
right? So you're born in 1994.
Yes.
Okay. So third grade, you're 8 years old,
Mm-hmm.
right? 9 years old. Who was your teacher?
I don't remember.
You don't remember your teacher?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
I
So
don't remember.
all right. So anyway, that's the point is, we could have taught you in the fourth grade when we taught you long division,
Mhm.
the rule of 72. You take 72, you divide it by the expected growth rate, right? Tells you how long it takes your investment or whatever you're trying to measure to double in value. 72 divided by whatever the growth rate is, right? If you happen to know how long it took to get to where you are, then you can take the 72 divided by 10. It tells you what your rate of return was, right? So we could have taught you that in the fourth grade, right? Growth rate, Dow Jones Industrial Average, 30 biggest companies in America, right? Represents the index value for the growth of the economy. 1935, when Social Security was signed, had an index value of 105. 105. It was 1100 in 1983 when they saved Social Security by putting in the current system, and today the Dow Jones Industrial Average is 44,000. 105 to 44,000.
Mm-hmm.
That's a 9% compound annual rate of return on invested capital for 90 years, right? Okay, well, 9%, rule of 72, 72 divided by 9 says whatever you have doubles every 8 years, right? So if the value of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, will make it easy, is 40,000 a day, 40,000, and it grows at 9% every year for the next 20 years, just like it has for the last 90, then it's going to double 2.5 times, isn't it? Because it's going to double every 8 years, right? So 8, and then half of 8, so it's going to double 2.5 times. So 40 becomes 80 in 8 years. In 16 years, it's 160. Half of 160 is another 80. In 20 years, it's 240,000. That's where the Dow is at. But if I rob you of $50 trillion of your investment capital between now and then, it ain't gonna matter to you, because you didn't make any money. But if you take that 50 trillion and you invest it in that market that goes to 250,000, then you create $150 trillion wealth for your retirement, right? You're living the American dream, aren't you? But if I rob you of it, and I take tax the money from you instead of taking it from LeBron James, then they get to create another $150 trillion of wealth, don't they? That's what we're talking about. Over the next 20 years, we're talking about who's getting the next $150 trillion. Do you want it to go to them, the top 10%? They already got $102 trillion. You want it to go to them? Then don't change it. Just keep doing what you're doing, right? You'll be 50 years of age, and the top 10% of the country will have more than $400 trillion of the nation's wealth. And you'll be arguing about the other 20 trillion or so among the people at the bottom of the income scale.
Mm.
Is that what we want? Is that what we want as a country? Then then what are you gonna do to help fix it? You're gonna take that Twitter stuff that I've done, and you're gonna share it with the president, because he's got an account, with your 2 senators, with your congressman. And you're gonna say, I interviewed this guy, I talked to him, I like what he's got to say. Now, I didn't understand all of it necessarily, I don't get all of it, but he's not in charge and you are. I like what he's talking about, because he's telling me I'm getting 120,000 tax free and I could use a tax break, right? He's telling me I get to take 15% and convert my money into savings so that I can become financially independent when I'm 70 years of age, and I'm interested in that too. So you need to tell me why we can't do that, because he says we can. That's what you have to do, and you have to tell everybody in your class, and then you have to get your people in your class to do what? Tell all the people on your phone. How many contacts you got?
Well, I have a lot. Probably, I think I have like maybe 100 friends on Facebook or something, and probably the same on Instagram. I mainly use just those two.
Okay.
Haven't gotten to other, like I know there's TikTok, there's Twitter,
Yeah.
and I've always been like, I'm just sticking to two things. But now that I'm like interviewing people and
Right.
I'm like, man, I might have to give in and do the TikTok and do that. But I just have very like short attention. So if I pick up my phone, it's
Yeah.
like game over. I'm not doing anything for the rest of the day. And then that's why sometimes I don't respond to my messages, because I'm like, if I look at this thing, like that's it.
So
But yeah.
so if you were to if I take and send you the text,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And then you send it to all 100 people in your phone,
Mhm.
and then you pick 10 out of the 100.